Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Ward, a Daily Planet Productions podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss Ward while those return to the world of parahumans. My name is Matt Freeman and I'm joined by the world's most popular normie, Scott Daly.
That's me. Everyone voted for me in this week's question, right? Like that, it was just everyone. So we don't really have much to talk about because it was just me.
I mean, we were leading them to that answer, so I assume that's what they said.
Yeah. This is the weekly podcast where you and I eagerly dive into Wildbow's world of spinning tops, child-killing unicorns, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week we kick off Arc 8 Beacon with chapters 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3. And we're a little late this week, Matt. It's a Thursday night. We're sitting here recording, which is not our normal recording night, but because we're a little late, we decided to include Tuesday's chapter in our episode this week, so we got 3 to do. And this was, I think you described it as a bunch of table-setting chapters, right?
Yeah, I see this as, I mean, I think we discussed in the previous arc that we were perhaps culminating certain things, and as we begin this arc, there's a lot of touching base with various characters, communicating things, preparing, the ideas of sort of imagery and symbolism of instability and just foreboding in general, as if we are building towards something, but we're not sure what it's going to be, and we haven't got there yet.
Yeah, and you mentioned to me, we were kind of, after we finished reading all these chapters earlier in the week, we were talking about this idea of web serials and how web serials kind of maybe more than any other kind of literature need to have these chapters where you kind of reset the table and remind everyone of the situations and do this thing where, like, okay, we're having to set all this up again because you're reading these 2 chapters a week. It's a much slower reading process than just opening a book. Right. Yeah, we've been pointing this out in various ways throughout our whole time here on this show, how back in Worm, the start of every arc would be the table setting, if you will, for that arc, and then there were sort of larger movements within the story that may have spanned several arcs, and in those cases they generally require more table setting. So if anything, the fact that we have 3 chapters of positioning and communicating and no real conflict yet sort of indicates that we might be entering into a long sort of multiple arc chain of up on, but that's what it kind of seems like to me. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's the feeling I get to, especially when you take 3 chapters to do a lot of the setup and bringing up of conflicts, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I didn't want it to sound like I didn't like these chapters. I absolutely did. I think there's a lot to talk about here. But yeah, they're chapters that are doing a lot of legwork, and sometimes you just need those chapters to just do a lot of work to set up stuff that's going to come later.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot going on. It's just not much in the way of the kind of conflict that we're kind of trained to expect.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All right. So announcements this week. So Scott, do you want to make the first announcement?
Yeah. So after a week of us having an episode that's 2 days late rather, we're having another weird week. July is like, for my wife and I, July is our vacation week. And last year we went on our honeymoon and we were able to pre-record episodes because we were reading a book that was already released, but that's not the case now. We're reading a book as it comes out. So Matt and I cannot pre-record next week's episode. I will be in Colorado next week, and I will actually be visiting Matt on our normal recording time. I'll be staying at his place while we're driving around Colorado, but there's really just no time on my vacation to sit down for like 6 to 8 hours and really jump into these chapters. And plus, because we're covering one chapter this week that we normally wouldn't, next week's episode will only be a single chapter episode, which I don't think that would work very well.
Yeah.
So what we've kind of decided to do instead of just skipping a week is we haven't done like a worm/ward mailbag episode in a while. We haven't just taken your questions and talked about them. We've been giving you guys questions for every week, but we haven't been answering questions from you. So we're going to take next week as an opportunity to do another mailbag thing. And then the week after this, we'll pick up on all the chapters that have been released since then. So it'll be Saturday's chapter as well as the Tuesday and Saturday chapter for next week.
Yeah.
So it'll be another 3.
Yeah, assuming there are no surprise interludes, which
sure, which there
always,
could be.
Yeah.
We'll cover those two if they come up in that time frame. But so that's the plan. So yeah, guys, start asking your mailbag questions. We'll do this just like we did for Worm. If you want to ask a question in the Reddit thread for the episode, you can feel free to do it there. Please put a hashtag mailbag somewhere in your questions. So when I'm searching for questions to pull them, it's easy to do that. If you want to email them to us, you can do that too. It's what is the email again? gotwormpod@gmail.com. That's gotwormpod@gmail.com. Just put mailbag in there. And we'll take any questions. Like if you want to ask us stuff about Worm again, even though we're not covering that right now, do it. If you have questions specific to Ward, ask them. We're not going to do questions about other things. Like we did that in the past on mailbags, but we have a patron Q&A we do that kind of stuff for now. So this is just a Worm, Ward, parahumans focused mailbag. So yeah, I look forward to doing that. I always liked those episodes. It was always fun seeing what you guys came up with. So I think that'll be fun because Matt and I will be in the same room while we're doing it, which is something we're not really used to. Yeah,
this will be the first Worm podcast that we've done that for. So
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, next announcement. The fourth quarterly fan art contest begins now. And the theme for this round is family. The contest will run from now until Friday, August 17th at midnight. The official rules post will be up on dailyplanetfilms.com and should be linked in the description of this very post. And we're changing the way prizes work this time around.
Yeah, so I think the long story short of this is our original plan was, we'll get a print of this artwork and we'll get it signed by Wildbow and then we'll send it to the person. Matt, you and I did not take into account how much it costs to ship posters, especially internationally.
Or ship anything internationally.
Yeah.
I tried so many ways to solve this problem and it turned out
it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Especially to ship to Canada to get Wildbow's signature and then ship from there to another country. It's so much money.
Right.
And so instead we've decided we're just going to up the cash prize that we do on this. So we're going to give a little more cash and we'll go into the details of all that. The actual official rules post for this, which will be up. If you're listening to us record live right now, no, it is not up yet. But if you're listening to us on a podcast form, it's up. So you can go look at our official rules and everything. So sorry about that. I don't understand why the posters are so expensive. I really don't get it. And I don't get US to Canada. I get to Australia. I get why it costs $500 to ship something to Australia. I get that because it's very far away. I don't get why US to Canada is $300 and something dollars. I don't get that at all.
Yeah. This was one of those situations where I was like, well, surely I've misunderstood something or input something wrong or asked the wrong question, but no, that seems to be the case.
Yeah, we were completely unprepared for that reality, and now I understand why so many contests you see around the internet say, sorry, US residents only, because international shipping is just a pyramid scheme or something.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
So we will make it up to you in other ways, though. We're upping the prize pool money. And I think I've been thinking about maybe doing a runner-up prize as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not just one person winning each time. I think that's something fun we could do. Yeah. But I think the theme is pretty cool. We actually... I went into our patron Discord and asked people what good themes were, and family was one that I really liked. That some people, I'm sorry to the one person who came up with it. I didn't actually check who it was, but I think it's really good because it's broad enough, but really fits with the theme of this entire story. So
yeah, there's a lot of potential. Your mind gets going immediately, and I think we'll probably find that person and credit them somewhere relevant.
Yeah. I will try to do that.
Okay.
But thank you everyone for coming up, for tossing out all those themes. Okay. So Wildbow was saying it was Murder Death Hug. So let's give him credit right now.
Hooray for Murder Death Hug.
Yes. Thank you. So good. So much. So that's the fan art contest. Yay.
Yeah.
I love these. I love them so much.
Yeah.
They're so much
me
fun.
too. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to the entries this time.
Yeah.
All right. So next item, Community Spotlight, where we read what people wrote from last week's thread. And the discussion question last time was, what's your favorite or most interesting mundane character? So basically everyone had great answers. I mean, it's funny to me how I kind of forgot how many great mundane characters there were in these stories.
Yeah.
So from Stelhex, they choose Yamada, and they say, memes aside, just reading her interlude again, and stuff like, why aren't you scared of me? Because I have no reason to be, Jessica lied, meeting the girl's eyes. It just makes you realize what a badass she is. And yeah, she is. She is badass.
Yeah. Kausubalu said Pigot, and said she's a flawed and honestly pretty nasty person, but also competent and capable at what in another work might be the prototypical supporting good guy job. For all her prejudice against capes, she's not even a terrible boss. We know anecdotally that she would confide with at least some of the capes under her, and when she did something immoral in the interest of the greater good, she took full responsibility for it. That's a very good point. I mean, I do completely agree that Pigot is kind of a nasty, bad person, but as a character, she's certainly interesting. And that's, I think sometimes we forget that, like, sometimes when we don't like the people, that we make it so like the character's bad. And that's something that I constantly see in criticism a lot, is like, I don't like what this person did and therefore they're a bad character. It's like, well, no, like, fiction is the safe space where we can, like, shine a spotlight on terrible human beings and say we like how their character is designed and don't have to worry about like passively endorsing terrible behavior. So
yeah,
I think it's cool that you can have characters like this.
Yeah. And I mean, she's a great person to kind of empathize with, because she was this like badass combat PRT soldier who was badly injured and became disabled and became extremely resentful about it, and took on a leadership role, but only after this resentment toward capes had sunk in. So it's a great, it's kind of a great tragic arc, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
Next, Pizza Hot Dog Lover and the Venom Rex have selected Glenn. Venom Rex says, the poor sod that had to teach Taylor, of all people, how to manage image without fear. And they say they just like all of their interactions together, and that he's a really swell guy with the knowledge, the knowledge to deal with parahumans effectively. He basically instills the need to maintain appearances in the Cape's minds, and not just like, doesn't like force them to do it. And then Pizza Hot Dog Lover says he's a smart guy who has a tough job that he was good at, and it's always fun to read about competent people. That's true, I agree. Number 2, he was a muggle who successfully worked with capes, which is pretty rare because capes are so difficult to manage.
Yep.
And he kind of got them to not dismiss him immediately due to how capable he was. And finally, he was someone who initially disliked, who I, meaning Pizza Hot Dog Lover, initially disliked, mostly due to Taylor's characterization, but grew to appreciate after he called Taylor out on some of her bullshit. I think that's great. Like, Glenn is one of the first times in the story, actually, where someone puts a mirror in Taylor's face,
Yeah, absolutely. And it works. Like, she actually like listens to some of it, which is another kind of rare thing.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to mess up this name. Survival. Let's go with that. CVIVAL said Charlotte and Forrest. They say Charlotte kind of got swept into Taylor's story, and she was able to keep up with the Queen of Escalation. That's very true. And she kept that whole gaggle of orphans under her control and cared for, even after Brockton Bay got bodied. Man, there's a lot of great verbs here. I love calling things bodied, because that's a great movie I saw. You should see. It's about rap battling. It's great. And they also mentioned that Forrest was of course, the guy who stood up before anyone else to help her fight Mannequin ended up being key in that Mannequin fight. The first normie out of her territory to do so. And even after that, he stayed with her and stayed with Charlotte and helped with the kids. They were good folks, Survival says, and they hope that they're doing okay somewhere in the megalopolis. Me too. I do too.
Yeah, or maybe some nice corner world settlement.
Yeah. Maybe the megalopolis is maybe not the best place to be right now. So yeah, maybe they're somewhere far, far away.
Yeah. EXE JPEG WMV selects Natalie by a country mile, they say. Her relationship and general personality when interacting with the team feels like a parallel for the current public relationship with parahumans. Yeah, so it's almost like she's a stand-in for what the kind of the public perception is.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think we'll see some of that in this week's episode as well.
Mm-hmm.
Shinichi says Dr. Mother is their favorite normie, not for any agreement with her character, but actually for the exact opposite. She almost exactly embodies the ultimate extreme of Taylor's doing the wrong things for the right reasons mentality. Someone who started out doing unambiguously good thing, killing Eden, and I like that he puts Fuckster in here too, because that's Eden's official name, guys. That's what it is. Before she could form, but quickly slid down all the way the slippery slope right after, literally making an empire out of a mountain of human misery, suffering, and death. And I like this a lot. Like, I like the idea that, like we were talking about, like, I don't agree with this character. I don't like this character, but I find them a fascinating construct. And I think that's what it's all about.
Oh, sure. I mean, Dr. Mother has spawned so many conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's the important thing.
Yeah. The thing that I was most fascinated and most, I guess, pleased by this question is very few people gave the same answers. We had a lot of people, we didn't even pull all of them, but everyone, like in the back of my mind, I was like, everyone's just going to say Yamada, and then that's just going to be boring. We're just going to have to talk about that Yamada the whole time. But everyone gave a different person and had different reasonings for them. And I think that's really great because, you know, we talk about how much the story's focused on capes and focused on this world and how much the capes kind of ignore everyone else and are just focused on the cape problems and the cape world. But yeah, we do have these very well drawn, fascinating, normal characters that exist in this world. And I think it's great that so many people were able to spotlight so many of them.
Yeah, I like the discussion of Glenn also because he's one of the few characters, like all of the capes have some kind of life-shattering trauma in their past. And most of the normies actually also have a lot of trauma in their lives just because it's such a hellish world. But Glenn, like he may have, you know, something bad may have happened to him in his life, but if it did, we don't know about it and he doesn't dwell on it. And that actually makes him one of the more unique characters in the parahumans world, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
All right. So in terms of general discussion that was interesting, we got a lot more Gary related pushback than I think we were expecting to get. Several people felt that we were being too harsh on him. And I think Scott and I agree that people have good points, but I don't think that any solution that doesn't involve efforts on both the human and the cape side for peaceful cohabitation are going to work.
Yeah, I mean that's like several people said, and it got upvoted a bunch of times that they said you're being unfair to Gary, and I was like, well, am I? I really went back and looked at this and re-listened to what I said and reread the chapter and was like, were we being too harsh on him? And I mean, I guess if you look at it as binary, if you say Gary's wrong and then say therefore the way the capes are handling things is right, then I can get this idea of we're being too harsh on him. But I think where I'm at is both sides are fucking up big time. Both sides are doing wrong things. The capes need to communicate with the human beings that live on this planet way more than they do. They have not been communicating with these people. They have not been sharing information with these people. They've kind of been just ruling them as if they just get to because they have powers. And I don't think that's the way to go. But I also don't think painting every single one of these parahumans as objectively evil and we must hate them and mistrust them is going to solve anything either, because they're not going away, Matt. Like unless the end of this book is like solving a way to get the shards out of the people's heads, which I kind of doubt. It's that we're gonna have to deal with them. They're gonna have to learn to live together. So I mean, I think Gary's a bigot with good points, but I think his bigotry is hurting his ability to make rational decisions.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this character is being set up to be responsible for, either directly or just by being a patsy, some horrible events. And we don't know what those are going to be yet. But if you just kind of look at the flow of the story, it seems very likely that nobody is going to be singing Gary's praises at the end of the story. And so I don't feel particularly inclined to be in his corner right now.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to look back at arc 27 or whatever it is and be like, man, that Gary, he sure knew that the right thing to do was to paint Kenzie as a terrible person. Yeah.
To use her as part of his bigotry-based political platform. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's a lot of preamble, but it was necessary this week. And now we're getting into Beacon, chapter 8.1. And this arc begins with Victoria waking up to a gloomy, windy, dark city, and she thinks the world kept spinning like a stubborn top. As she flies around, she doesn't observe any crime, even with the blackout the city's undergoing, suggesting that people are too scared to even burglarize, and that they're basically hiding. Yeah.
The chapter and therefore the arc opens with a lot of this foreboding imagery, like you said at the top of the episode. There's the blackouts, temperatures are dropping. We get this recurring motif of this incessant wind from the portals. Like the wind has just become like a constant now, almost. And I love this description of this encroaching frost that is every day taking a little bit longer to melt. How the sun is penetrating the clouds, but it takes until 11 o'clock in the morning before the frost turns back to this damp, vibrant green. There's this real feeling that winter is coming. Like, I know we can't say that phrase anymore. It's like Game of Thrones ruined it, but like winter is coming, and this is to get us into this mood. With winter comes this whole host of problems for everyone on the planet. Like the darkness is encroaching, things are bad are happening, and our characters are going to be pushed like they've never been before. Like narrative tells us that for characters to grow and change and move past their conflict, they have to be put in direct confrontation with bad things with that conflict. And there has to be choices made and things happening. So we know this is happening. Like it's going to happen. And the start of this arc is putting us in that mood. That just like, we know it's coming. We can feel it, like the everything. And I think we see that in this imagery. We see it in the cold, the clothes that people are wearing. I just think it's so fantastically well set up, like that you just get in that mindset immediately.
Yeah, there's also a beat here that I want to pick out because I think it runs through this and it relates to what we've been talking about. That she mentions, like she's flying around, she sees some people who look like they're like scoping out a building. They're not robbing it, but they look like they might be checking it out to see if it's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And she says that she basically just lands near them, and that's enough to send them running.
Yeah.
And she's like, in her mind, it's like, oh, good, I scared away the burglars. But like, I was thinking, what if they weren't even burglars, and that's just how on edge people are. That like, if a cape lands near them, they just run. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that, or it could be this idea that they were scoping out a building. Like the crime hasn't happened yet. The big thing hasn't happened yet, but it's being scoped out. It's coming. Like that's the big feeling of the start of this chapter. It is coming. And I think this is a perfect time for us to discuss the arc title and kind of make our guesses about what it means. Because if we take a beacon and we continue our light source metaphor, a beacon is just a light, set up on a high position, and you can put on a tower or a hill or something. And I personally have a tendency to hear the word beacon and I immediately go to the positive. It's a symbol of light in the darkness. It's a signal of defiance. It can be a beacon of celebration, but it can just as easily be a warning, a sign of future conflict. And judging by how this arc opens, kind of leaning towards the latter.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I think there's a specific element in these chapters that I was thinking, like when it came up, I was like, oh, that's the beacon. I'll mention it when we get there. And and it is a positive beacon. But we know that these chapter titles never, or these arc titles never mean only one thing.
Right.
So
in fact, they most often mean all the things simultaneously.
Yeah, right. Right. So yeah, I'll talk about that when we get there, though.
Yeah, sounds great. I like that you pulled that stubborn top line, though. This description of the Earth spinning as a stubborn top. This idea that you can't stop it. All you can do is like there's no stopping it. All you can do is prepare for it. That's kind of where our characters are right now. And also, this is great setup for a time later in these chapters where tops are mentioned, because it's not the last time we're going to talk about tops tonight.
Yeah. We'll get there too. So Victoria flies to this meeting that's been called. It's a giant gathering of hero capes, and all our friends are here. There's the Shepherds, Azure, Advanced Guard, Foresight, Tempera, and Fumehood are there. Even Natalie and her friend are there.
Yay!
And we'll meet even more people before this ends.
Yeah, and to connect to our opening foreboding mood, we have this line here where Victoria notes that with the weather being what it was, the water being close enough that the wind could blow over it and chill everyone present, and the light weight of costumes in general, a lot of people looked like they were struggling to stay warm. And so this chapter thus far has been steeped in this imagery of the coming cold, the winter is coming, and the bad and stuff with it. And Victoria, in the opening of the chapter, actually thinks about how she's going to have to revisit her costume because her costume is just not... It's not insulated enough to stay warm during all this stuff. And we see here that this extends out to every single one of the heroes. The heroes are not prepared for the coming cold. And I think that metaphor works for the lack of preparedness for what's about to happen, that we're not ready for the bad we're about to break. And
that's, yeah. I like that. I like that. Yeah, I mean, it gives you this very striking image of all these, really powerful, badass people who are kind of huddled together, maybe, and maybe rubbing their arms, basically looking weak,
Yeah, you're right. The most powerful human beings on the planet are huddling in the cold. They're all meeting up in one place. This is probably the biggest congregation of power on Gimel right now, and they're shivering in the cold, huddling up against each other. And how powerfully worrying of an image that is. It's really great.
Yeah.
And the interesting wrinkle in this whole thing to me, and this could just be typical Scott reading too much into things, but the text indicates that there are a few non-capes around. You've already mentioned Natalie and her friend, but we also get to see how they're dressed. We see that Natalie's friend wore flannel, and Natalie wore an overly puffy coat that I was guessing would do a lot to keep her warm in this chilly weather. So we have this group of super powerful capes, cold, huddling, trying to stay warm, and then we have the only non-powered people in the place dressed appropriately and seemingly staying warm. And there's powerful imagery there too.
Yeah, I that's very evocative thematically. I agree.
Yeah.
So Victoria then meets up with her team, and Luxie demonstrates a very deep knowledge of put-down repartee. She explains that this is a product of having been in the ward's training camps where everybody rags on each other constantly. Preteen capes, man, we gotta love them.
Yeah, young children with post-traumatic stress disorder getting really good at insulting each other. Great.
Yeah.
Great. The part about this that really jumped out to me, though, and what I want to talk to you about, is how much like the some members of the group have this really big reaction to the kind of goofy, silly stuff that's happening in this group, like how much they're worried about their perception amongst the other heroes here. Like Chris, Tristan, even Victoria a little. There's this idea that the other teams are going to judge Breakthrough for high-fiving instead of fist bumping, for telling lame comebacks and goofing off. This idea that this is detrimental to their image. And I think it's no telling that in this passage we have Kenzie talk about how 70% of the kids in Ward's training camp are all about establishing a pecking order. I think this kind of reaction shows that that's not limited to just preteen capes. That's something that all capes do.
Yeah, I think these guys, especially the older ones, have a bit of imposter syndrome and a feeling like, because this is not really their debut, but this is kind of their debut, the first time they've put themselves forward together in the context of a gathering of heroes as we are Breakthrough, we are a hero team.
Right.
These are our cape names. They only picked their cape names and their team names so recently. So yeah, they're a little bit they're eager to not come off as fools in their first, their first debut, basically.
Yeah.
And you're right though that I think it's a bit they're being a bit overly cautious because they're just nervous about it. It seems to me.
Yeah, and I think this is what we're doing here is kind of setting up Victoria's mindset for the moment at the end of the second chapter where she comes up with this like new cooperation plan. Because this is like in Worm, we saw a meeting amongst villains, and in a meeting amongst villains, it was all about perception. It was all about strength. It was appearing like you are the strongest person there because that's the only way people will listen to you. These are the good guys. These are the supposed heroes. They're supposed to be like working together and the team of that are going to help save the world. And we're worried about the perception of a high five over a fist bump. Like what we need here is some cape to come in and propose like that heroes need to stop competing with each other and work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's an interesting contrast that this happens just before that suggestion is made.
Yep.
So yeah, Victoria thinks about the combative energy that she's sensing from Kenzie and realizes that she can't really distinguish where it's coming from or whether it's a good or a bad thing. Like, does it indicate that Kenzie is, in a lighthearted mood and feels like messing with people because she's in a funny mood, or is she angry and being aggressive toward people? And she doesn't really get Kenzie, and she thinks about the fact that she doesn't get Kenzie. But we get an update that Kenzie is staying at her home with some guardians, and her parents are locked up again.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I really do like this moment. And I think it's because there's this real tendency when you're reading a story to say that, okay, we've learned this character's backstory. We get her now. And we've had her interlude. We get her now. We understand her. We know we've got her. But I think the book is showing us that just because we know what she's been through and we understand her a little bit better, a lot of what she presents to the world is still a mystery. One of the cool things about the interlude structure that Wildbow does is we get a brief window into a character's head, but then that window shuts and we move on. People, especially the ones that Wildbow writes in his stories, are not static. And just because we knew the way Kenzie was a few chapters ago doesn't mean we know the way she is right now. Stuff has happened to her since we were in her head. So we don't know how she is doing necessarily. And I think in this way, we're like really successfully put back into Victoria's head, into her point of view. We understand Kenzie as much as she does, but not completely. And we're still worried about her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the reason this chapter is focusing on Kenzie a little bit may be that, I mean, we do need to keep paying attention to her. We did not, the previous arc was not, okay, we've now solved Kenzie's problem. It was showing us what Kenzie's problem was so that we could at least get a grip on it.
Yeah. And as much as we want to say, okay, maybe Kenzie has made progress, maybe she's made little baby steps, that problem is definitely not solved.
Yeah.
There's one more thing that's, I think, the introduction of a recurring beat that we see at least one more time throughout these chapters, is the idea of masks, both literal and figurative, making it really hard to read people. Victoria says this in this moment, "I wished I could see her face. The helmet she wore covered it. I had a sense of how she comported and conveyed herself now, and she gave away very little like this." So we're kind of introducing this concept that Victoria is trying as hard as she can to read Kenzie and to watch out for Kenzie. But the mask makes things complicated, and we'll circle back around to that when it's brought up again.
Yeah. So finally, Dragon and Defiant arrive, and Victoria slips into a reverie about how, in her view, a lot of the problems in Brockton Bay were due to a lack of leadership on the hero side, which is an interesting interpretation, of course. And she wants to talk to Defiant and maybe understand what went wrong. Yeah.
I really, really loved this moment. And I talked about this on my live tweet a bit because I had such a kind of strong reaction to this. And it was kind of a revelation for me as well as it was for Victoria. Because one of my least favorite things about sequels is how they tend to take characters who go through these wonderful, complicated arcs, who grow and change as people. And then in the sequel, they just kind of regress them back to an earlier state because they need them they don't know what else to do with them. They need them to go through something, so we just regress them so we can just kind of go through that arc again. I actually think Incredibles 2, a movie that came out, is like a perfect example of this, that we just regress our characters so we can have them do something again. Hey, listen to our podcast on that episode. It's good.
Yeah.
So we've now brought back Defiant and Dragon. And I have to be honest, for a bit, when they showed up in the interlude, I was kind of worried about this. These are two characters that I think just have this wonderful arc throughout the story. And they grow and they change and they find each other and they are improved by each other. And I was worried that by bringing them back in the story, it might mess with that change and growth a little bit for the sake of the story. But in this moment, when Victoria is going through this stuff, I realized this is Defiant's purpose in the story now. And his role is not about regressing his character. It's about using the growth and change that he did have during the previous story to reflect on our protagonist, who is a person who doesn't know how she feels about second chances and doesn't believe in forgive and forget, and is having this real problem getting through the idea that you've done really bad stuff in the past, and how can we get to a place of forgiveness for that. So it's he's just a perfect reflection for her of trying to understand what that kind of change and redemption looks like. And that just made me so excited for what they can do with this character and how he revolves around Victoria going forward throughout the story. And I was like, yes, I should never have worried. I should not have worried ever. I don't know why I was.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I think like from what we've seen of him in this chapter, it's evident that he's not regressed. He's, if anything, he's more, he's further down the path of sort of defeating his ego, if you will, because she doesn't come on real strong and accusatory, but she says some stuff that a person might find offensive, the implications that you killed some of her family members, basically. Yeah. And he doesn't become defensive. If anything, he appears to completely take it to heart and not try to make any excuses. And this is exactly like you said. This is Defiant at the end of Worm, and maybe we'll see, maybe a second arc where he comes to terms with that. I don't know, but the fact is that this is a very complex and developing character, and I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I really do.
So I mentioned before, like when the dragon ship appears and she sees Defiant, she does that thing where she spaces out. So I think we're gonna we may not do this perfectly, but we're going to attempt a Victoria spaces out counter on this episode.
I think we should do it for the rest of the book, frankly. I mean, I wish we had started this at the beginning, but we didn't know that this was going to be a thing at the beginning.
Exactly. I mean, it starts happening at the beginning. You're right. Because this happens so many times in these 3 chapters that Scott and I decided that we would point it out every time, or try to. Yeah. So Dragon and Defiant give a speech, and they teach us a bit about Earth-C. They tell us the divergence was 600 years ago, and that the world's shift into religious fundamentalism has led to an enormous world population. I think we may have known some of that, but it's cool to kind of be reminded of it, if not, or if so. I kind of hope we go to Earth-C at some point. Some of the remaining Fallen have apparently gone over to the Earth-C side, including the new Timaeus branch, which I'm not sure if we know who that is, or if we're supposed to have any clues.
Yeah, I mean, we know who our members. We know the Cape members of that branch, right? But yeah, who the name goes back to? Maybe one of the speedrunners was named Thomas.
So you think it's a safe assumption to say like the speedrunners are the new Timaeus branch, and they're representing the Tohu or whatever?
Yes.
No, not Tohu.
I know which one you're. I know which one you're thinking of. Those later Endbringers are so hard to remember. The first 3, it's so clear.
Kansu.
There you go. Good job. I'm proud of you. Yeah, I think that's. I don't know if it's ever explicitly stated, but that's the feeling I get, that because we mentioned them specifically, and then we also mentioned Scapegoat. So there's a real feeling that yes, these people that betrayed the rest of them and ran with the Fallen are part of this new branch now. Yeah. And I feel like it's only a matter of time before we visit this Earth. Frankly, I think that the book has shown that it is too interested in kind of exploring and examining these different aspects of religion and spirituality, and in some ways, and it's too rich of an exploration to ignore that, given that it wants to do that. The Fallen are this version of religious fundamentalism, but they were always like on the outskirts, right? They were never really in command. They were never in control in any kind of real way outside of their little cult. This is like a fully authoritarian religious regime that has been ruling a planet for hundreds of years. And it's a very interesting lens to look through this idea of spirituality and religion, and perhaps how those things can be corrupted to seize power in a different way than the Fallen did it.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to see where this goes. So Dragon further confirms that Teacher is behind the worst of the attacks, mainly by helping to create portals. Now that we've firmly established what's going on behind the scenes, we can take it as evidence that this is precisely not what's really going on, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like this, that it's all Teacher is like playing right into perceptions that everyone has so much that it kind of makes you believe that things have to be more complicated than that, right? We know, like, we've been told that this whole Earthsea stuff is just a distraction. It's just meant to, there's something else going on underneath it all. And I just don't think the overall plot movement of this part of the book is going to be, remember that bad guy? He's just still doing bad things. Not that I don't think Teacher is not doing bad things. I'm sure he is. He's Teacher, but I just think there's more to it than that. Like it's too simple to just be like, it's Teacher, he's doing all this stuff.
Yeah, I agree, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah. So there's another moment I just wanted to point out real quick here before we move on. At the end of Defiant's speech, he gives this speech about cooperation, about how everyone needs to put aside their competition between hero squads and cooperate. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But we hear Sveta give this line that says, "The wars finally reached us." And I know this is such like a subtle thing that's maybe not worth bringing up at all, but it strikes me as part of the reason why I like Wildbow's writing so much. Nobody remarks on this. Like, nobody says anything. Like, no one responds to her. We don't even get to see an indication of how Sveta said this. Like, it's just Sveta said. There's no describing emotion attached to this sentence. But we know Sveta, and we know that when they were talking about the possibility of war, she got so upset that she like told them they had to stop talking. Like, she couldn't even hear it. And now it's here. So like there are these little moments, and I know we've talked about this on Worm many, many times, but there are these little moments of characterization that can go unobserved, that don't even have to call attention to themselves, but still impact you because you know the character so much. Like, we don't need Victoria to say, "Oh, I'm really worried about Sveta because she was like really upset about this idea of war." We don't need to do that. We know it, and it's just there, and it's just like put there in front of us, and we can just have a little bit of flavor, a little bit more character moments without having to go into full expository few sentences on those things.
Yeah, Wildbow spends the energy to get this Rube Goldberg machine of characters running.
Yeah.
And once it's running, he, metaphorically runs around and adjusts things here and there as the story progresses, but doesn't necessarily need to manually manipulate every single element, because you're now doing a lot of that work for him. You're keeping the characters in your head, and he trusts you to do that. And I agree, that is unique, and that is really cool.
Yeah. And there's another moment of it in this very section too, because Sveta says that she's going to go to Weld because Weld's trying to get to her and he's constantly mobbed by people. And we have Capricorn say, "I'll come too." And you have to remember, oh yeah, Tristan loves this dude. And it's not commented on. No one says anything about it. Just like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. You can imagine him saying it like an excited, fanboyish way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the team kind of tries to comfort Natalie, but does a terrible job overall. And then toward the end of this interaction, Natalie says capes are neat in a sarcastic way.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit, Matt. I got a bone to pick with you. But
all right,
before we get there, I am fascinated by how Victoria handles this interaction. because the text says, "We might," Capricorn said, putting a hand on her shoulder. He put an emphasis on might, but it didn't feel like enough emphasis to change the meaning of his statement. He was usually better about wording and presentation. "Leaving it up to me to try to rally the troops. We're tenacious. We've made it this far." I think this is pretty indicative of Victoria's state of mind, that like, okay, Tristan put an emphasis on might, but it was not enough emphasis. And she kind of takes this as like, I guess it's up to me attitude. And there's something very Carol about that in my mind, that she's like, oh, I got to do it. It's my turn now. And then, of course, immediately after this, Victoria spaces out again. Ding, that's number two. Yeah. And starts thinking about how screwed they are. So she just said, it's up to me to rally the troops. And then she spaced it out and was like, oh God, we're really screwed. And then the next thing she says to the group after just trying to rally them is about how the speedsters and scapegoat betrayed them and joined the bad guys. And it's just like, it's really great job rallying there, Vic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
So let's talk about Natalie a little bit.
Okay.
Because it's so here's how the sarcastic "capes are neat" line is written in the story. Natalie says, "Capes are neat," Natalie said, in a way that made me think she was being sarcastic. "We'll crowd watch, right?" And look, I don't want to fully jump to any conclusions here, but like the way this sentence is wording, I think, is very specific and interesting to me, because like you could easily write this sentence as, "Capes are neat," Natalie said sarcastically, but it's not written that way. It's written, "Capes are neat," Natalie said, in a way that made me think she was being sarcastic. Victoria has shown throughout her interactions with Natalie that like she generally frustrates her and she doesn't like her. Like, I just remember all the times when she was like fashion destroying her. Like, oh, your fashion's so bad. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that maybe Natalie actually does think capes are neat. Like, her mentor is Carol, and like she agreed to be a law person that helps out capes. So like, I'm not saying she's not frustrated by capes, that capes are often frustrating her, especially when it comes to legal things. I completely agree with that. But I just think that perhaps the sarcasm that Victoria is picking out here is more in her head than it is in Natalie's intent.
I think it is too much of a stretch, Scott. It is too much of a stretch.
Really?
I do. So, I mean, like, the context of this is basically capes talking about all the horrible cape problems that exist in the world, and then a couple of capes being shitty at each other, and like one of them walking away, and then right on the heels of that, she's like, it's hard for me to imagine her saying, in response to all of this, "Capes are neat. We'll crowd watch, right?" So I feel like Victoria is reading her as being sarcastic. If anything, it probably is subtle, because Natalie's probably not going to like make a sick burn on capes in like a crowd of capes. But yeah, it's I have this sense actually, and I think it's interesting because this disagreement actually reveals kind of a set of disagreements about Natalie's character, perhaps, which is that like maybe the whole reason she's in like cape law is that she resents the capes, or capes did something bad to her or somebody in her family and then got off scot-free because of all of the like special privileges they get, and she wants to make sure that the new status quo that she's helping to craft, basically, in a very minor role, obviously, doesn't give capes the kind of carte blanche that Victoria is used to, and maybe that's the kind of thing she was talking about when she referred to like, things are going to be different, Victoria. Things are going to be different.
I think that's a very fair read, and I will not say you are wrong. And yeah, I don't think the line read of Natalie saying capes are neat is like fully like gung ho positivity, like capes are neat. This is the best. I'm having a great time. But I think Victoria is constructing an image of this person that is she doesn't like me, she doesn't like us, and she is here to completely stop me from doing the things I want to do. And I just don't think that that's who Natalie is, really. I think I go back, like, once again to her association with Carol and how much Victoria doesn't like that. But I think the fact that she respects Carol as much as she does shows that on some level she appreciates Capes. Yes, I agree with you that she probably thinks the law needs to rein in Capes a little bit. Her frustration with their behavior is very indicative of that. But I don't see her as this person that is like secretly like, oh, Capes.
Yeah, I think now that we've had this bitter and acrimonious,
this is the closest we've ever gotten to fighting on this podcast.
Yeah, I know. I will say that I don't actually care as much what her position actually is
after this whole thing. I don't actually care.
Well, I just think it's interesting that what's interesting here, I think, is the fact that we are so suspicious of Victoria's perspective on things that we can legitimately ask, is it possible that that your read on this person is just 100% wrong? And I can't say, like, I can't actually say, no, Scott, of course her read is correct, because, like, no, I mean, everything about this book is indicating that Victoria is not super laser good at reading situations, especially when they're like tainted by the involvement of her family. So I just think that's pretty cool. And we'll eventually get the correct answer and see which one of us is right.
I think that's a really fantastic way of framing this whole thing. That you're absolutely right. That this is more indicative of what kind of protagonist Victoria is than anything else. Yeah. Which is why I'm continually shocked when people call her boring or I just don't get it. I just don't get it at all.
Yeah, no, me neither. I don't see it that often though. So Victoria and Lookout now go to speak with Defiant, and after getting pumped up by Victoria, Looksee takes a chance to ask Dragon why she merged Looksee's eye tech with someone else's tech.
Yeah, I want to zoom in on this really quick because I'm really into this interaction and I think it's really important. Victoria and Kenzie are flying towards Dragon and Defiant, and Dragon has used some of Kenzie's tech, which from our perspective, we're like, holy shit, that's awesome. I mean, like, if Dragon sees something and it's like, that's good enough to use, like, that's a big deal. Good job, Kenzie. But she's a little bummed out because she sees that her tech was mixed with someone else's, and that's kind of an implicit signal to her that, hey, your stuff wasn't good enough, so I had to mix it with something else. Now, older Kenzie would have been upset about this and would probably like spy on Dragon and try to figure out what kinds of stuff she needs, and then spend an entire week without sleeping, like building a thing just to prove that she's valuable and wanted and needed. But Victoria knows that now, and she literally approaches the situation with WWAD. What would Ashley do? And the response, Kenzie says, is she would tell you, knock it off, believe in yourself, you're awesome, like, trust yourself. And it works because Kenzie gets to Dragon and asks her point blank, hey, why did you do this? Why did you mix my tech with someone else's? Instead of spying on her to get information, she just simply asks her a question. And you think of this and you think of how different her life would have been, how different things with her foster parents had gone if she had just walked up to them and talked to them and said things like, hey, I really like you guys. Like, I feel really safe here, but also that feeling of being safe and happy makes me scared because I don't want to lose that. And can we talk about this? How different it would have been instead of spying on them, looking up stuff on the internet and doing all these things. And I just really feel like this is a big, big, big step for this girl. And that makes me scared because we have this looming threat of what Gary's going to do on the horizon. And we could have her like making progress and then just see it just ripped away.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I share your fear actually, but I agree that this is a big thing. Like, this is how people change, right? Like you take a risk, and you take a risk that maybe deep parts of your mind think is a terrible choice because of how your life has gone so far. You've always been punished for taking this kind of risk. But that's just because you grew up with abusive parents, of course. When you take this kind of risk in real life, you get rewarded for it. You get invited into Dragon's ship. You get shown all this cool stuff. And now your mind learns just a little bit, a nudge in the direction of maybe that's not such a risk. Maybe I should do that kind of thing more. And that always helps. It's very necessary, I think.
Man, that's a perfect way of phrasing it. Yeah, that like she was conditioned into this idea that I can't talk about these things. I can't ask these questions because I will be immediately punished for them. And the only way out of that is to retrain yourself. And the best way to do that is to be surrounded by people that are not going to lash out at you and are not going to abuse you for asking questions or asking for help or just being a curious human being. That's the way to get better. And props to Victoria for recognizing this and for framing the whole thing with this in mind. Like, what would Ashley tell you to do? Like, maybe you need to push. Maybe you need to not be afraid of the negative side of this. Maybe you need to search for what the positive side of this interaction could be. Like, that's really great of her, and I'm glad she doesn't understand Kenzie. She's still worried about Kenzie. We are too, but she understands enough to approach this situation in a way that I think helps the girl make progress.
Yeah. I also just now noticing, like, it kind of indicates how much respect Victoria has for Ashley. She's admitted, like, man, Ashley does get this girl better than me. And I'm not even going to give her advice. I'm going to say, well, what would Ashley say in this situation? Yeah. And it works. So.
I love the Kenzie saying, "I'm not the swan song whisperer," though. It's a really nice touch.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good. So as Dragon takes look-see inside the craft to no doubt take all kinds of secret recordings of all Dragon's tech, Victoria confronts Defiant about what happened on the day Leviathan attacked Brockton Bay. Colin is honest and tells her he doesn't know if his actions contributed to Shielder's death.
Yeah, I really love just about everything in this moment. As you talked about before, Defiant is not defensive here. He is honest. Like, he probably didn't have to tell her the truth. Like, I don't know how someone is going to prove that he was lied to her and was not completely honest with her here, but he does it because he's taken responsibility, and this is what shows it. There's some other stuff I want to bring up though with you, because I want to circle back around to this idea of masks once again, because like we echoed our earlier beat with Lookout, we have this moment where she asked this question to Defiant and says, "I couldn't see his face or read his expression. Same as Lookout, same as Dragon. Was it because I'd grown up with New Wave that I found it so frustrating now? I'd always considered myself a cape at heart, and now I was feeling this annoyance at the omnipresence of something fundamental. Masks, secret identities. Did I jar them just as much? Did they look beneath my hood and expect to see a mask there?" I find this whole thing really interesting, Matt. Victoria is a cape, and therefore has always been ingrained in the cape mindset. And we've seen throughout the story, when any conflict between human and cape has arisen, she tends to side with the cape side, and that makes sense. She's one of them. But we're seeing here, as she struggles to help her friends recover, and as she struggles to recover herself, she's finding some of the more cape-ish tendencies to be a hindrance to that very recovery. The fundamentals of cape-dom, masks, again, both literal and figurative, secret identities, they make it so much harder to understand the people beneath them, so much harder to see them. And how can you help someone when you don't really understand them? What we might be seeing here, to me, is Victoria kind of transitioning to a new kind of equilibrium. We said last week that in this rising conflict, that the Gary-esque human idea of all capes are bad and should be stopped is problematic and is not going to work. But also the cape's method of hiding things, of covering things up, of masking things, that's not really the way to do it either. The slogan of the story is, "The rules have changed." And if that's true, then maybe it's time we stop doing the cape stuff like we did it before. Maybe the true path to recovery is the removal of these masks. Capes need to see people, and people need to see capes as people. And when I see Victoria kind of positioning herself where she's definitely not fully on the human side, but she's starting to see the problematic parts of capes, maybe she can represent the symbol of this change of what a cape in this new world needs to be. A person who is a cape, but also is unmasked, is a human, is showing themselves. And I think I in this moment, I kind of saw where her role through the story could go, and I was really into it.
Yeah, that's really great. I love all of this. You know, like you pointed out, the role of masks made sense in the reconstruction of the superhero genre, which is what Worm was, as like, okay, they need to protect their identities for a set of plausible sense-making reasons. Those reasons don't really apply in the same way in this situation on Earth Gimel, where everyone is refugees. They're all clinging on by their skin of their teeth. There's not really room for this cops and robbers thing to breathe in Gimel, and capes and masks are a big part of that. And I think maybe they do need to go. And I also agree, like, having placed Victoria as the protagonist of this story, like, she's one of the only, I mean, her and her family are the only one of a very small number of capes that we know who are unmasked.
Yeah.
And that has to either have been intentional, or, you know, that element's not going to go unused.
Yeah.
So, not that it has gone unused. I mean, we've seen consequences of her being unmasked, but I think it could be very fundamental to the story, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, when they did it in Worm, the world was not ready for that yet. Obviously, we saw severe consequences to New Wave's decision to be the parahumans that were unmasked. But the rules have changed. Maybe they were just a little too early on it. The world needed to end before they said, we need to start this new wave of capes unmasking themselves. And I love this idea that she could represent that going forward into the future. And that's the real road to recovery.
Yeah.
Secondly, the other thing, these are very long points of mine. I'm sorry. Like we said, I love how the text shows that Colin tells the absolute truth here. That like you said, that this all confirms that his change is genuine, that he is truly a different person now, that this is the way he is. And I really love how the text describes this. I just wanted to read some of this, because she asks him, like, were you responsible for her family member's death? And he says, I don't know, Victoria Dallin. And there's something to me of him using her full name there that, like, shows the weight of it, like the formality of it, that he's acknowledging her complete self when he's responding to this. But then this line, there was something less crisp and confident in his voice, more momentarily lost, that left me feeling like he genuinely didn't know. Maybe even to the extent that it wasn't something he truly considered before now. And I love that, because, like, even as someone, like, has changed, the things we did follow us, right? Like, they're still there, and you can learn new aspects of the terrible things you did every day. It's just, you have to live in a place where you can, like, take responsibility for that. And that's where he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Oh my God. Sorry. I'm trying to turn my phone off. Yeah. I mean, it's once again, I mean, we talked about Colin before, and how, you know, this is really getting to him. It's not just, I don't know. Like, I was really struck by this, and, like, not only just happy to see Colin for, like, fan service reasons, but, like, we're not just, like, seeing Colin again. We're actually bringing him back into the story fully, and that's what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, and like you said, and you've said this a lot, that characters change in the background. Like, characters don't freeze in the story because we're not seeing them. So even we've seen the Colin as he made his way to the end of Worm, but he's still in this progress, and he's changed since the last time we saw him, seemingly for the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just have to read. This one thing he says, because it's like Worm summarized in one sentence, where Colin says, my mistake was that I decided I was fine with villains dying if it meant the monster could be slain. So we have, like, this character that's gone through this redemption arc, and he's generally seen by the end of the story by most people as, like, a guy who's done everything he can to redeem his past mistakes. And he is fully admitting that his mistake was letting people die to kill big bad monster.
Yeah.
That's Worm. This Worm.
Yep. We'll just leave that there and let people.
I'm not going to say anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, this first chapter ends with Victoria using his guilt to ask for a favor to visit the teammates in prison.
Yeah, it's kind of fucked up. I mean, she like admits that like I didn't intend this. This is why I approached this with him, but I can use him. I'll just use him.
Get some leverage out of his obvious heartbreak in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, like. I don't want, like, I get it. I totally get it. I get why she's doing it, but it was really surprising to just be like, all right, time to use this dude. Especially when it's Colin. It's Colin.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, he's strong.
Yeah.
He can handle it.
He can handle the weight. I love that. That's in the next chapter when she's like, yeah, I think I just like took all the weight that was on my shoulders and threw it on him. And Kenzie's like, yeah, he can handle it.
Yeah.
Like, well, maybe not.
Yeah. He's got those robot legs, though. All right, so 8.2 picks up immediately, more or less. Victoria goes into a train of thought about the two types of tinkers, which roughly map onto introverts and extroverts, except more related to how they conduct their tinkering activities and their attitude about it. She also goes further and notes that the male tinkers tend to be the internal types and the female tinkers tend to be the more excitable ones. And then this segues to a line of thought about how she regrets not being able to study parahumans professionally.
Yes, this is really a pretty fascinating tangent she just goes off on. And I like some of the subtle bits of dramatic irony where she's like, wait a minute, Dragon's a girl, but she doesn't fit the paradigm. And it's like, well, is she? You don't know she's a robot. Nobody knows nobody knows who? What is a list of people that know Dragons and AI? It's very small.
Yeah, I'm not sure, actually. I don't remember how far that propagated because, I mean, people knew. I mean, Saint told people, but yeah, I mean, I think Tattletale knows. But anyway.
But it just really strikes me upon analyzing these chapters after reading them how much they're working towards setting up the plan that Victoria gets by the end of this, because she goes through this whole line of thought about the different kinds of tinkers and wishing she would she could study them, and it basically ends with this moment of her saying, I wanted to be able to do research and dig for answers. We'd already unraveled some of the big mysteries, and by some tragedy, we couldn't actually work on them. We weren't sharing information. So this whole big tangent ends on this moment of her saying, we're not cooperating, we're not sharing, we're not really working together. And it just goes back to this idea of they beat Scion because for one fleeting moment in the history of the planet, the most powerful capes in the world realized, thanks to a slight nudge by a little bug girl, that working together was the only way to stop the big bad guy. And then they did it, and they kind of just went back to doing their own stuff again. And Victoria's seeing that frustration, and it makes sense that this is leading us to this moment at the end of the chapter where she says, look, here's how we need to do this thing. We need to set up a structure where we're all working together again.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that there's that thematic through line between the two stories. I agree.
Yeah, and I think it's cool how subtly we're kind of setting that up and reinforcing that through these early moments of these chapters, that like it just every one of her like tangents keeps coming back to this idea of cooperation. We're not cooperating, we're not talking, we need to do this. Yeah,
that's a great point. I don't think I pulled that out. I mean, first of all, increment the reverie zoning out counter.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean this does show that her thoughts are tending in certain directions systematically. I think that's very important to point out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we then overhear the two Tinker women talking shop, and Kenzie mentions again that everything she makes basically has to be a cube. Not literally everything, but it seems like she has this restriction where things end up being in boxes or cubes. And this leads us to learn that Defiant is good at working around such things.
Yeah, look, Matt, I know there's a part of me that should be worried about this. I know, as you said, Kenzie probably likes spied her way into so much dragon tech that she's going to use to do things in the future, and that could go really bad. And I know Defiant's ability to make Kenzie's super-powered spying devices like smaller and more compact is even more dangerous. But fuck all that. There's Dragon Mom and Defiant Dad. Now have baby Kenzie. And yay. I love it. Look, anyone who can turn Defiant into a non-asshole is probably like a perfect person who can maybe help Kenzie. That's how I'm excusing my feeling of happiness for this moment.
Yeah, and also I want to see some badass Tinker shit.
Okay, selfishly make something cool. Yeah,
selfishly. Right, make something cool. I don't really care what it's used for.
Yeah. Of course, I'm probably going to be eating my words when this all goes sideways really, really badly in the future. But
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we're all here.
Yes.
So next, Victoria and Kenzie head to talk to Tempera and Fumehood. Victoria repeats her lie about there being a power nullifier that allowed her to get shot. And Kenzie mentions having done a lot of research on lead poisoning recently.
I mean, when your parents are trying to slip it in your pasta, I guess you should know what it does, right?
Yeah, right. I think that's our second hint that they tried to specifically give her lead poisoning.
Yeah.
And then there's this dialogue where Victoria says, that thing about it being cool to get shot, don't take that as an actual example, I told her. Ha ha, she said, give me some credit. That was part of the general problem. I had no idea how much credit to give her. I like that as a bit of humor, and also just like a great example of, again, Victoria being self-aware of the fact that she does not really get Kenzie, and doesn't really seem to be learning to get her at a very high rate either.
Yeah, I mean, this is the girl who threw a crammer at Mama Mather's head just so her friend wouldn't feel bad about being the only member of the murder club. So yeah. I can kind of see the logic of, oh, people will like me more if I get shot. Well, right. let's do that.
Yeah, that's a Kenzie line of thought.
Yeah.
So Victoria finally admits to someone that Breakthrough is her team, but it's an I guess so, not very committed. I feel like the trajectory of Victoria's arc here tends toward like a greater sense of belonging with this team over time. I mean that's what I want to see, I should say, like, because at first it was like I'm not really part of the team, I'm a coach, and then it was like literally waggles her hand in like a I don't know, and now it's like I guess so, and I'm just I don't know. This is definitely a track that I'm in for, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's so funny that her knee-jerk reaction in this moment is to say no, to say that the team had broken up. And even she admits to herself that that's not true. We're totally back together again. I completely, like, that's where our track is heading. Victoria is this person who's very unsure of who she is and where she belongs. And she's got this one laser-focused goal of stopping bad things, the bad things that happen to her, stopping that from happening to other people. But I don't think that's not enough of an existence for a human. It's just the mission. It's not like life. And I agree that she's going to be all about Team Breakthrough by the end of it, unless they're all dead.
Oh, God.
This actually, honest to God, when I wrote this, it sent me down a rabbit hole of wondering which one of the members of this team is going to be the first to die, because I feel like it's probably going to happen at some point. And I went down the list and every single one of them devastated me. Like, I have, like, if you Sophie's choiced me which one of these people I would want to die, I would not know how to answer that. I don't think I could do it. Yeah.
What's funny is I think a similar situation came up in Worm, and there was definitely a preference of who was less important.
Yeah, and it's not like I didn't like the characters at all.
Yeah.
I don't. These people, no, don't take them away. Don't do that to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are all like wounded, and we love them, and don't take them away.
Everyone thinks I hate Brian. I don't hate Brian.
I was thinking that.
I know.
So just had to pull this line out. Victoria comments on common sense. Fumehood replies, "Oh yeah, that's me. I exude common sense." Yeah, we know all about your common sense, Poison Apple.
Yeah, like I'm in this point where every time she talks, I'm imagining her asshole tattoo.
Yeah, you have an asshole tattoo.
That's just, this is, every sentence. I'm assuming she also says, "Also, I have an asshole tattoo."
Yeah, so defining characteristic.
Yes.
So next, the parental units stop by, and they ask Victoria if she's had any contact with Crystal, and then they try to pry out the address, or rather, Carol tries to pry out the address where Victoria is living.
Yeah, and as we mentioned at the start of the show, there's a lot of table setting in these chapters, and this is one of those where we get this little bit about Crystal having not checked in or being missing, which is surely not something that's going to come back around again in any kind of terrible, depressing way at all.
No. One thing I didn't point out was how eager Fumehood is to like be defensive of Victoria and and distrustful of family. I thought that was interesting.
I loved are these enemies as they approached, and Victoria's response is, "They're my parents," and Fumehood says, you didn't answer my question.
Yeah, right.
That's a really perfect little beat there. You know, Matt, Victoria had this wonderful interaction with Carol back in 7.4, and I was genuinely excited about her dealing better with Victoria. And I think she does a generally okay job here, but there are just moments where she's also just got a fucking Carol, right? Like, yeah. I think she's this person that just constantly means well, but is just rubbing you the wrong way. Like this moment where Lookout says she's changed her name, and she's like, "Oh, did you change? Be careful. Rebranding is a useful tool, but not if done in excess." And I'm just like, no one fucking asked you, Carol. Just back off.
Right.
No
Thank you for your lecture, man.
Yeah. Thanks for the unsolicited advice. Actually, so we announced on Daily Planet that we're going to be rebranding and changing our name next month. And someone responded to that tweet with, "Rebranding is a useful tool, but not if done in excess." And I had forgotten that was a quote from Worm. So my gut reaction was just like, who the what? Yeah. And then I was like, oh, that's actually hilarious. Well done. That's hilarious. But my gut reaction was, and I think that's why this scene with Carol rubbed me the wrong way, is because like I think the gut reaction to that kind of statement is like, no one asked you about that. Like back off. Yeah. Especially since Fumehood is standing right the fuck there.
Right. And Carol might actually know her because they were both in Boston at the same time. Yeah. And would know all about that particular. In fact, the fact that she knows who Fumehood is suggests to me that this was a passive aggressive dig at Fumehood.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure if that's true.
I think it was. I mean, also like Victoria is rebranding herself as well. Like, I don't think this was meant as a dig at Victoria, but she's also working at redefining herself. Like she just picked a new name. So
yeah. The thing about Carol is like, she'd be fine if she just stopped like halfway through whatever it is that she planned on saying. Yeah. Like, oh, you haven't heard from your cousin? Oh, okay. Well, let me know if you hear from her. Yeah. Bye. Then like, that would have been a great, like, oh, that was refreshing. I got to see my mom. I didn't feel pushed or manipulated in any way, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect thing for the sentence too, because like if you break the sentence up, the first part is okay. Oh, did you change? End of sentence. You're doing great.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah. Okay, so Tempera then prompts everyone to share what they want out of capedom. Things get very philosophical. Victoria admits that she would like prestige. And then like immediately the thought that this might not really be her thought, her desire, that she might just be channeling her mom, sends her into this like instant death spiral, remembering when her mind and heart and body weren't hers at all. And she goes to a real dark place real quick there.
Ding. Ding. The Victoria Zone's out counter is, are we at 4? I think we're at 4.
I think we're maybe at, I think 4.
Yeah. I mean, this is awful, and I feel so terrible for her. I like at this point, I don't know much else to say about these dives back into her, like her trauma. Like it's it's really rough to watch. I feel bad for her every single time. And you see kind of how, like, I think Victoria holds herself up very well to the people around her, but also to the people reading her. This whole warrior monk persona that she's going to come off as always collected and calm, that we often don't get to see the level at which Victoria is struggling just existing day to day. And then we have moments like this where it kind of breaks through a little bit, and then we're like, we have to remind ourselves, like, oh yeah, this girl who seems like she's got everything and she's offering advice and trying to help the people around her, she's holding on by a thread.
Yeah. It's real worrisome. I mean, and then she comes back from it pretty quickly, but we kind of know she's described what this is like enough for us to know that, like, she doesn't really pop back. You know, she's down now. Like, the fact that this happened, it's like that hand pushing her underwater thing. It's sapping her.
Yeah. I mean, she kind of snaps back mid conversation and has to catch up, which is really nice touch. That, like, yes, like, there's this interesting thing in narrative, especially first person narrative, when you kind of go into the mind of a person and their thinking and processing, that, like, oftentimes we let this happen and we don't, like, we almost kind of pause things so we're not missing anything that's happening in the real world as they work through stuff. But when Victoria goes through these zone outs, the top keeps spinning, Matt, and things are still going on, and she, like, has to zone back into it and catch up on the conversation. Yeah,
well, absolutely. I mean, I think that's you know, very often when you're writing a point of view character, you want to communicate that you're communicating their inner impressions, which aren't necessarily lengthy, complex, emotional inward journeys. But in this case, we are communicating, in fact, that yes, these are completely distracting and completely absorbing. And yeah, I mean, again, this happened 4 times in 2 chapters so far. So.
And before we get back to the rest of the team and continue the chapter, I just wanted to point out once again that the story takes the time to show how wonderful and happy Sveta and Weld are. And this certainly can't be a thing that lasts. It's going to be devastating. Or maybe the fact that it's so obviously not going to last means it will last, but, like, it'll be like a monkey's paw where, like, everyone on the earth will be dead except for Sveta and Weld. And Wildbow will say, "You got your wish," and then cackle maniacally.
They're trapped together in a Grey Boy loop.
Yeah. Oh God, that's not even what I was thinking. You made it worse.
Of course. You can always make it worse with parahumans, Scott. So when they go back to rejoin their team, Sveta admits that she gets a bad vibe from Dragon. Like, Dragon is operating on a level where everyone else is inconsequential, mere mortals, she says. And Cryptid doesn't like her either, but for different reasons. Yeah,
this is a really interesting debate because I think the initial reaction here, if you're like tuned in with your characters, is to go, oh yeah, maybe. I mean, we don't know how much Dragon changed from the whole Pandora thing that happened. Maybe we're looping back around to the AI is evil plot. Mm-hmm. But thinking about it and really looking into this chapter is I think once again we're seeing a representation into the problems with capes and this idea of the way things were. Sveta mistrusts Dragon because she sees her and Legend and Valkyrie as these super powerful capes who could have possibly been tied into the Gold Morning stuff, and they still don't know, like, how much they knew. And like she says, like, did they ignore stuff? If they were so tapped into the source of all this bad stuff, did they ignore things? Did they look the other way? Were they aware? Like, was Dragon aware of everything Cauldron was doing? And this is cape communication all over again. This is sharing of resources, this sharing of data, this thing that Victoria was wishing they did more of, this thing that Gary last arc was complaining about so much. Like, we're not cooperating still. Cooperation has broken down, not just between humans and capes, between capes and capes. Like, it's just, like, over and over again, I think we're reinforcing this idea.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I don't think we're looping back around to the Dragon is an evil AI thing.
I don't think we are. No.
I think this is perhaps more meant to show us more about the characters who are speaking. You know, it's meant to show us more about where Sveta's head is at and where Chris's head is at.
Yeah. And Chris doesn't even offer a reason really for why. He's just like,
he's like, I just don't trust people.
Oh, Chris.
Basically,
we're going to talk about Chris next chapter a little bit.
Yeah. So they start talking about updating their team's jurisdiction, and Victoria proposes something more grand than that. Something like a hero community organization with a critical mass to integrate and share knowledge and resources between teams.
So how do you feel about this idea, Matt? To me, it seems like this is kind of a combination of some of the best parts of the old ways while still trying to improve upon them and encourage a kind of better behavior amongst the hero teams. And it also brings back in this cooperation of villains, this idea that this agreement that they had back in the old ways that, hey, as long as you don't go too bad, maybe you can help us out when things get really bad. So it's kind of like, I think, doing what I think the story wants to do, which is learn from the past and improve upon those things, but not be set in it.
Yeah, as Victoria says, she's kind of working it out as she goes along, so it's not concrete enough to necessarily have a firm opinion on like, oh yeah, this is great. But this is the moment that I was talking about when I said, oh, this is the beacon. Victoria is going to either be the beacon or create the beacon that signals and draws together all of the hero organizations, and it's a new paradigm. So like, you know, before on Bet there was the Protectorate, the PRT, which was essentially, you know, disproportionately powerful due to both numbers and due to the resources they had at their disposal and the cauldron favors they got. And then there were the corporate teams and you know, spin-off teams like New Wave and whatever. But there was it seemed like it was very much centralized around the Protectorate, and we no longer have that, especially with the Wardens being taken out because they were kind of the candidate for the replacement. Now it's this much more perhaps egalitarian framework where if there's going to be a powerful hero force, it's going to have to be a community of lots of different hero teams, which may have different objectives, but they're all on the same side, you know, philosophically. And that's kind of where I was imagining this going.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, cool.
All right, so let's move on into 8.3. So Victoria checks up on the hideout near Hollow Point, which nobody has been in for a few days. And wind is apparently blown into the room and scattered papers everywhere, which Victoria painstakingly cleans up.
Can we just take a moment here to appreciate the symbolism here? It's not complex. It's not like hidden. It's just really simple imagery that gets across a point very quickly. The wind has blown through the hideout and things are in chaos. The story has primed us since the portals open to know to get this idea that wind equals portals. So now we're just reinforcing this state of disarray by showing that the wind has come through here, has come through their hideout and just thrown everything into a mess. And then we see Victoria deciding to clean it all up, and that crystallizes her goal throughout all this thing, that the things have come in, have thrown everything into chaos, and she's going to be the one to clean it up. It's so simple, but so effective.
Yeah, it's a perfect callback to the beginning of this arc where we get these notes of foreboding, the wind, the moodiness, and even their sacrosanct little hideout has not been spared. The force of this foreboding presence creeping into the arc.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And yeah, like you say, her immediate action is, well, I'm gonna set it right.
Yep.
So as she's cleaning, she finds a piece of paper and she reads a conversation between Tristan and Byron, kind of like an I am conversation, but written on paper. And she reads it, boundaries, Victoria.
Yeah.
And the conversation is about the two of them, the two brothers, trying to negotiate a proper gift that Tristan can get Byron in exchange for a favor Byron did him. And we see a lot about their relationship and its difficulties.
Yeah, it's probably not something she should be reading. Yeah, it is really personal, but I do appreciate it just because we get to see like how they've worked out a way to communicate with each other, because that's probably something that's very difficult for them. And I like that we see this brief snippet of conversation between them, and we see their two very distinct personalities like starkly measured here. Like Tristan is trying to suck up a little bit. Byron even calls him out on it. It's like, you gave me an extra 45 minutes. I owe you this, and I'm going to get you a present. And it's like, just give me some clothes or something. I don't care. That's Byron's laid back thing. And then Tristan is like, how about I get you something to push your style envelope? Because he's like trying to push him. And then like he's I don't want to call him manipulative, but he pushes people a little bit. And Byron is kind of like, no, like, don't do that. This is the stuff I like, but you don't have to do anything for me. I'm cool. Like, and it's just like this really short little conversation that just completely represents who these people are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who, this is definitely something that happens with siblings. I think it happens with anyone you're close to, where you get to a point where you're so close that you test, you push, and it's not a great habit, but I think like everyone, certainly all siblings do this, especially when they're children, probably still when they're adults. I
also appreciate that we use this little I am conversation at the beginning of the chapter to kind of prime us to the fact that a lot of this chapter is going to be talking about Tristan and his problems. So we start the chapter off and we immediately go to this I am conversation, and we're kind of cued into the fact that maybe we're going to be dealing with this guy in a bit. And then of course he does show up. So it's like so much of writing is just laying the groundwork for stuff and paying it off. And it's so like one of the most fun things about analyzing stuff to me is seeing how all those tracks are laid down for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I didn't, she's noticing things about a lot of the other characters, but I agree that this specific text pointing at the conflict between Tristan and Byron is definitely priming us for that. So as she cleans up, she notes how poor the foundations of their world are. So many of the things that Gimel relies on are imported from other worlds, their food, their supplies, everything.
Yeah. And as she thinks this, she thinks about how quickly everything was built in this quest to get things back to normal as fast as possible, that this world is poorly constructed and owes all that stuff to people in another world that they barely know. Earth Gimel is like a house of cards, and like that wind's blowing, the portal's wind is knocking over the house. Look, it's not the perfect imagery. But the thing that's really interesting to me is that in the middle of this kind of hopelessness and this realization that she's having, she says, "This is what we were now. This is how things are now. This is how things are now." This is a callback, Matt, to back all the way back in Arc 2, Chapter 7. Victoria saw that written on the walls of Hollow Point. This is how things are now. And she looked at this and looked at it as a challenge. She looked at it and said, fuck that. I'm going to stop that from happening. Now, 6 arcs later, we're back in Hollow Point, and the same words come up again. But this time they're coming from Victoria. They're coming from our protagonist.
Yeah. I mean, she's definitely remembering them. I'm not sure if she's necessarily remembering them with a like, this is how things are now, or if it's like, or if she's recognizing the echo of. I think what's happening, she's recognizing the echo of that in her thoughts, and maybe, I don't know, maybe taking that as a warning. I'm not sure exactly. I would like to go back and read this part again. Actually,
I think you're right. I mean, that is specifically her. I mean, it's italicized here. That's kind of how we indicate. Like, the line before "this is where we were at" is not italicized. "This is how things are now" is italicized. That is a structural indicator that she is consciously calling back to those words that were said in that arc. You're absolutely right. And I don't think that this is her saying, yep, they were right. But I also like some of the fights out of her a little bit here. Like, of course she's going to fight. She's cleaning up the room. Like, that's what she's doing. But like, she is in a really rough place. Like, we've seen throughout the last few interactions she's had with people that she's dove into this like zone out, like dealing with her own issues. She's beaten down, and we're going to see in her conversation with Tristan, she admits that she's probably drowning too, that like, and she's not going to give up, but like, she's realizing that things are like so much worse than she probably thought they were. Like the this is how things are now thing was a challenge that she's going to say no, but she's realizing that even the very foundation on which their world is built is crumbling and not theirs. Nothing is theirs. So like, it's just so much harder than I think she thought it was ever going to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this is yet more stuff in the first part of this arc, indicating like, yeah, I mean, foreboding, and I think not only is it communicated to us, but we're seeing that Victoria is starting to get it. Yeah,
and like we said earlier, Victoria does not let her warrior monkness slip very often. So I think the fact that we call back to that saying, the fact that we had this specific callback, is her like letting slip how beaten down she is. And now she's going to have to help someone else who's possibly drowning even worse than she is.
Yeah, that's right. Speaking of other people who are drowning, she also finds some doodles by Kinsey with praise from various entities on the paper, which for some reason makes me very suspicious.
You're chocolating again, Matt. You're too paranoid. This is just an analog version of the chatbots that she had created in the prologue. She just
an analog version.
Well, yeah, because they're just it's not digital. They're just drawings.
What is their physical form?
They're just Matt.
Are they robots?
No, she's just drawing, Matt. She's just drawing. She's doodling. You never doodled characters? I had a character when I was bored in math as a little kid called Super Math Destroyer, and he blew up the math problems that I didn't want to do.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
His nemesis was the math maniac who made the problems more complicated. I didn't like math.
You had a rich inner life.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'm going to, because I'm too worried at the alternative, I'm going to buy your explanation for now. And then, of course, Victoria is surprised by Tristan's arrival. He comes in. At first, they're kind of alarmed at each other's presence because they weren't expecting anybody to be there, but then it's fine. And then he kind of sits down and he's kind of slumping around and being very serious and moody. He's not doing too good. He seems worse than we've ever seen him, really. And he immediately turns the conversation towards the difficulties of his life. He asks how she avoids drowning in the Cape stuff. And she says nowadays she does feel like she's drowning, but only because other people are making life more difficult than it has to be.
Yeah. Once again, like she admits that she's like, there's one small personal thing, but then there's a whole bunch of external things too. That one small personal thing being the wretch, which is like the source of all her issues right now. I think it's funny that she kind of like pushes that out of the way to talk about the external a little bit. But man, I just want to talk about, like, I think what the story has done with Byron and Tristan is really clever. I talked about this a little when I was tweeting about this chapter, but like we've built this up so slowly over the course of the book. Like we have not focused on these two very often, but when we do, we always get like an update as to what their situation is, and then we move on and do something else, and then a few chapters later we get another update to them, and hey, they're worse, and then we move on again and cover other stuff. And it's just like there's slow kind of background roll of them getting worse and worse and worse and further and closer to the breaking point. And I think we're just about there, Matt. I think I think they're just about at the point where things are going to get really bad if they don't improve.
Yeah, the thing about Tristan specifically is he's a lot like Victoria in that he is very much about appearances. He's very much about keeping stiff upper lip. I'm a competent, strong, leaderly man who, yeah, I got my problems, but I'm tough. I can handle it. Focus on Kenzie. Focus on Ashley. And in the meantime, we don't know what's going on in his head. Just like if you didn't know, if we didn't have a window into Victoria's head, we would probably think she was doing a lot better than she is, because she's similar. She does the same things.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's probably why Tristan kind of immediately jumped on this opportunity to talk to Victoria alone, one-on-one. That's why he steered the conversation here so soon, is because he's like, this is a person that might understand what I'm going through, and I want to maybe get, like, Victoria says it sounds like a cry for help, and he kind of bats that away. But isn't that just in his nature to bat it away? Like, isn't it probably a cry for help? Like, what he's doing here is saying, I don't know if I can take it. I'm drowning and I am getting tired of swimming. I have given up on the shore. Like, there's this really like depressing imagery of just like lost in the middle of the ocean, where I'm not even trying for shore. I'm not even trying to like get the water out of the boat. The boat's gone and I'm just drowning. And
it's really interesting how he dismisses or doesn't, like, he doesn't find it compelling when Victoria is like, hey, with parahumans anything is possible, meaning, of course, like, hey, maybe there could be a cure. It's like Sveta apparently still holds out hope for some kind of cure to her problem, and it's like he doesn't. He's like, no, man, like, you're talking about the future, I'm talking about today. And I think there's a personality type where even when they're asking for help, if they don't ever want to seem weak, even when they're asking for help. And what Victoria, and it's an almost impossible line to walk. It's probably something that like only a therapist could really do. But like, Victoria doesn't quite manage to both hold out her hand with an offer of help without making it seem like Tristan's not displaying a weakness here.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I think that's there.
Yeah. Well, I also like what you were saying about this idea that like, that he mentions that I am worried about right now, not tomorrow. Like, it's very easy to say to a starving person, well, we'll get you some food tomorrow. Okay, but I'm starving right now. Like a drowning person, okay, we'll throw you a life vest in a few weeks. It's like, okay, but like, I'm drowning right now. Like, hope is a kind of a fickle thing, right? Where it's like, okay, we can try to maintain hope for improvement in the future, but that doesn't solve the pain and the suffering I'm going through in the now. And I think it's actually telling what a person does when they've actually lost hope. Do they resign themselves? Do they give up? Or even in hopelessness, do you still fight? And that's an interesting window into what people are. And we're seeing him nearing that point, entering that point of complete hopelessness. And what's he going to do? I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, he admits that there are days when he can't do it anymore. This seems like one of those days where he's really down. He misses romance. He's not in control of his life. Victoria offers to help him out, to kind of dredge up her darkest times so that she can connect to him over similar experiences. But she also admits that it would cost her a lot to do so, like mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
And when she says this, he demurs and tells her, no, focus on the others. I'm fine, which is not true, of course.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't want to rip her up too much for doing this, because I don't think she does it intentionally. But as you pointed out, when we were talking about this earlier today, she basically is like, it's going to cost me a whole bunch of stuff to help you, but I'll do it. Like, which is setting you up to be like if someone says that to you, like, you're not going to say, oh, okay. Like, it's just kind of like, and I don't think that's a conscious thing on her part. I don't think it's like she's consciously trying to push him away from making her get to this level. I just think it's like, it's something that's really tough for her too. So she's like subconsciously like pushing things that direction.
Right. I mean, she's just being honest.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. But it kind of like assures that this is where the conversation's going to end.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that's interesting, where I just said they were similar characters, and this is a way where being similar really backfires, because she's different enough from Ashley. She's different enough from Kenzie. She's different enough from Sveta that she doesn't need. She can relate to them and help them and be a comforting presence to them without having to like mentally take herself back to the wretch.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas Tristan's problems are not the kind that she can help with in the same way. She can't really help him. I mean, is if you take this at face value, she can't help him. She's just like, no, I'm. Oh, that's your problem. Well, talk to someone else then. Basically,
yeah. I mean, it's like if you're drowning, you can't be saved by another drowning person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what's happening right now. That they're both drowning in their own problems, and like it's really hard to help someone else when you're in that situation. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the fundamental problem here is that she might not be equipped to help this person.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
It is true that we're using a lot of water imagery for Tristan, and his brother just makes water. I don't know how much we want to read that into that, but
yeah, I mean that's probably in there somewhere. Yeah. I agree.
One of the things we see during this whole conversation, though, is that Tristan is creating these tops with his power and spinning them. Victoria says he created what had to be his fourth top, setting it to spinning. It was more balanced than the other, but it still had some wobble. And then at the end of this conversation, at the end of this interaction, we see Tristan grab the latest spinning top he'd fashioned with his power, caught it between his fingertips and thumb, and crushed it with an ease that suggested his superpower wasn't even needed. So this is that fun part where we get to remind you all about how the fact that the arc started with Victoria talking about a stubborn spinning top of the world, that the entire world was stubbornly spinning on, and we carry that forward to here. And now Tristan is making tops, setting them to spin, and then at the end of this conversation, crushing one so easily in his hands that it didn't even require superpowers. So that's some wonderfully positive imagery for you there, Matt.
Yeah. We're taking that stubbornly spinning top and we're just crushing it into powder because it's fundamentally unsound and fissile.
Doesn't even take super strength. Just
And in fact, to just completely read too much into it, if he had to use his super strength, then that would metaphorically mean that the world will be broken by superpowers. But the fact that he doesn't implies that the world will be broken by the unpowered.
Hey Matt, I really like your possibly too far read into.
I'm glad.
Yeah, I like that.
So next we do a little bit of a skip, and we're visiting the two incarcerated members of the team in the prison. And Cryptid is complaining about having to empty his pockets when he's basically a living weapon.
So let's talk about Chris for a bit.
Okay.
Because I had a revelation while I was reading these 3 chapters, and that revelation was I'm sick of Chris's bullshit. And it's what used to be funny, and Chris to me has just become annoying. And that's really what my read was when my read on it was, until I really dove into these chapters and looked at Chris's interactions with people throughout these 3 chapters. And I think what I discovered is what we're seeing here is not just a Chris that's just kind of worn thin on me. What we're seeing is a Chris whose attacks and jabs at his teammates and everyone else have just become a little more barbed in the recent events. He's always had these confrontations with Kenzie, this joking back and forth with Kenzie, but they've taken on a little bit more animosity in these chapters. In chapter 1, like she's talking about how frustrated she is with the fact that she can't really tinker because she doesn't have power. And he's just like, make a generator. And she's like, I can't. I need a generator to make a generator. And he says, try harder. And like, Chris, that's the exact opposite of the thing you want to tell Kenzie. And he seemed like he generally in the past has seemed aware of this. He seemed aware of when Kenzie's going too far and has been part of the group kind of pulling her back. But here in this moment, he's pushing her forward. And it's like, I think this is all reflective to me of a Chris who is also increasingly in a really, really bad place. And we've seen, like, we got hints with Yamada way back in the day that Chris doesn't have the ability to recognize when his jokes have become less funny to the rest of the group and more barbed and more angry and more hurting to the people around him. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what's happening in this very scene just kind of demonstrates a lack of self-awareness, because he's making a scene basically at the security gate into a parahuman prison, which is, really dumb. Like simply put, it's a dumb thing to do. And we know that Chris is smart. So he's either like really just aggro or distracted and not really paying attention to what's going on, and just kind of basically he's just kind of lashing out.
Yeah.
And he does that. And I agree with you that previously his like ragging on people was just a personality trait. It wasn't necessarily lashing out. But there's like a spectrum between that and just being a dick, probably because he's trying to express his frustration and desperation with his life.
Yeah. And I mean, there is a surface level excuse for all this. They're wanting to take away his medical supplies, and he's painting this picture of himself where my body could just fall apart at any moment. Like, if something falls out of me, give me this, and then I'll be awake enough to get the rest of it. He's painting this picture of himself. We've never seen this actually happen, though, which is a thing that I've increasingly noticed. Like, he has constructed this image of himself as this person that could fall apart at any second. It could happen at any moment.
Yeah.
But it hasn't in our view ever. And maybe he's just taking stuff to keep himself. But so that's a very surface level understanding of why he's so agitated. But yeah, I mean, it's not just in this moment. It's kind of throughout these chapters that like he's not in a good place. He's in a very, very bad place, even more so than I think we've seen him in the past.
Yeah, I agree. So they're given their instructions and they head inside to meet Rain and Ashley. And I really like the description of the prison details.
Yeah, I like this open air prison kind of. There's no walls. She just describes it as marshland in 4 directions. I think this is interesting because this prison is both similar to the birdcage, but very different from the birdcage in different ways. And I think if we tie things back to the weather setting the tone of the chapter that we did at the beginning of this arc, the prison is described as being sunny. Yes, there's wind, but it's normal wind. It's not portal wind. It kind of goes to show like this place is far removed from the problems of the rest of the world. Not that those problems will not be visiting it very soon, but I like how we kind of set the stage with that. Like, there's sun shining, there's normal wind, it's an open area. Yes, the people have explosives tied to their ankles, but there's not portal wind.
Yeah. I like it's a very practical description of how you might go about this, and kind of different from what you might expect.
Yeah.
And so as they go in, it turns out that there are some fallen capes who are captives within, which makes things a bit tense.
Yeah, a little bit. And it's just not even fallen capes, but Victoria specifically describes them as the most troublesome of the fallen capes. The ones that they actually really like threw the book at are the ones that are here.
Yeah, and they're obviously not too happy to see these guys.
Nope.
So Rain shows up first, and he updates them on what's going on with him. He kind of, same old, basically working on a little bit of, just bored, I think is mainly what's going on with him. He says that Aaron visited him, and she's spending a lot of time working on Lachlan Hund, the brainwashed kid that we met a couple times.
Yeah, sorry, Rain. It was just wasn't meant to be, buddy.
Yeah.
It's really good on Aaron, though. She was kind of going to be forced to be married to this guy, and she's now kind of helping him, right? Like I don't know if there's an attraction there or what's going on there behind the scenes, but this is someone who's been brainwashed, and she's trying to do good for this person. And that got me thinking of like my paranoia, or maybe it was Victoria's paranoia. Yeah, I'll blame her. Got me to like assume that like from the moment we first met her, this Erin girl was up to no good. But no, she's just she's much more simple than I think we gave her credit for.
Yeah, perhaps.
You see, you still don't.
No.
Matt. Oh, Matt.
No.
Still want that Byron Erin scene go.
No, I have my reasons. Scott.
Here's what I want. I want us to do a bonus episode that's you reading the Byron Erin scene in full,
Okay.
but making the readings in what you think is happening under the surface.
Yeah.
Emphasizes the scary forebodingness that you think that scene represented. I want to hear that. I want to hear that.
I'll just read it the way I read it in my head, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, of course. So after they stop this conversation about the frightening Erin, Ashley arrives with Slashley, but they don't get permission for Slashley to join them. And Victoria, watching Ashley's twin, thinks, I was reminded of the Siberian, seeing her, what with the long pale hair across her face, the natural arrogance, and the dangerous look in her eye. I didn't see it in the Ashley that was hugging Lookout right now. And I'm just pulling this out because it's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it is a perfect way of clearly drawing the distinction between these two people. I mean, we know the Siberian, and we know how awful and cruel and inhuman the Siberian was. So making this comparison for us, the reader, is just showing this Ashley is a completely different person now. Okay, not completely different person, but she's a very, very different person than this other version of herself.
Yeah. And we're happy. It's funny how I think we joked about this before, about how what if the former Slaughterhouse 9 member clone was the most stable of the group, but she seems to be doing real well right now.
Doing all right for now,
relative to some of the other members.
Yeah.
So Ashley likes the new team direction. It goes well with her Nietzschean philosophy.
Yeah, I really like how she just kind of admits that the leadership of the group has always been kind of undefined and weird. Like Victoria would pretend to lead or would lead, but then pretend like she wasn't part of the team. And Ashley always kind of assumes she's the leader because that's just who she is. And then Tristan would lead, normally when they were actually interacting with other groups, he would kind of be the de facto leader, but they never actually had a meeting. I'm reminded of the Undersiders talking about Brian's the leader, but maybe we need to decide that we're going to make Taylor the formal leader. And that conversation has just never happened amongst this group. And Ashley just rightly points that out here.
Yeah. I think we've pointed out a few times, this group is so averse to stepping on people's feelings that it's much more difficult to have that overt conversation where there is a risk of a feeling of rejection.
Yeah.
So, this is important. It was important to have this conversation.
Yeah. Without getting into a full philosophical lecture, what did you think of Ashley's thoughts here? She basically states this philosophy that they say they're not going to take over, and she responds, capes take over. We take power because we have power. Just like those with money have a natural ability and desire to earn money. The healthy are inclined to stay healthy. Do you agree with her assessment of parahumans and kind of the writing on the wall she sees in this plan?
I mean, I think that's a pretty concise way of framing certain aspects of human nature. But people with money can always lose all their money, and people who are healthy can always become horribly unhealthy. Yeah. So you can always break that cycle either accidentally or on purpose. It may not be the default.
Yeah. I think it's an oversimplification. But that's kind of Ashley though. So it's definitely in line for her character.
Right. I mean, it's a keen observation, but also there's nuance to it. So yeah. And then she tells them about her housemates and how they're all pretty screwed up monsters or otherwise not very useful.
Yeah. Like the scary unicorn lady.
Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah. I think this person is supposed to be a word of God, character, or a Weaver Dice character or something. My impression from the fandom was that people knew who this was and were excited maybe isn't the wrong word, but to see them in the story proper. But
Cool.
I didn't know about any of that. So
Now that you mention it, I recognize the Monokeros name, which I'm pretty sure just means like one horn. But I don't know where that's from, so I'm curious now. I almost wonder if I want to find out though, because I kind of like keeping my award reading experience relatively pure.
yeah, I mean that's been my philosophy from the beginning. If it's not in the story proper, then it's not important enough for the story that I'm reading.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it can give you some enhanced flavor, but if it's important enough, it'll be included in here some way. So
Yeah.
not that I'm saying it's not okay to get really excited and like to do it. Like that's fine. It's just for our purposes.
Yeah, to each their own.
Yeah, exactly.
So then chapter ends with Ashley telling them that there's one person who stands out to her and would be worth talking to in the prison. Crystal Clear.
Crystal Eye Boy is in jail? How did that happen?
I don't know. I have no idea. And now I'm deeply curious.
I mean, I'm inclined to think he's a guard more than he's a prisoner, because he would be a really good guard in the prison.
Yeah, so that's interesting because my first thought was he was a prisoner, and then like as I was kind of seeing people's reactions, some people their first thought was that he was a guard, and the text is I think the text comes down more on the prisoner interpretation, but it doesn't rule out the way it's written, and I don't think it rules out the idea that he could be a guard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I certainly have my opinion, but we'll probably learn the truth pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, and we also know that he was like an undercover agent, right? Like he was doing stuff for the wardens. So maybe they sent him here as part of maybe he's undercover in here. So he could be a prisoner, but not a prisoner.
I mean, he has the perfect ability to spy on like everything that's happening within the prison. So yeah, interesting. We'll see.
All right. So that's it.
Yeah, that's it. A little bit of name game. I kind of already spoiled it.
Yeah, you've ruined it.
Yeah, well, I didn't know. So Monokeros, one horn.
It means it means unicorn. It's so funny to me because this is a woman who was given a name that I guess is passed down, like she's the fourth unicorn, and then she has this title stripped from her from killing a child, and so she says, "Okay, fine. My name is Monokeros now," which just means unicorn.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm just going to go Greek with it.
Yeah.
All right. So no discussion question this week because the discussion question is you ask us questions because it's the mailbag, right?
So send those questions.
Yeah. Hashtag mailbag, right?
Yeah. In the Reddit thread. Yeah. Or email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all we got for you this week on We've Got Ward. You guys are all part of this show, so feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
You can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com. Send those questions. Or on Twitter @gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is @ScottDaily85. And Matt's is Mordina Unicorn.
Yeah. And if you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film, and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. No new Daily Planet episodes for the rest of the month. We're retooling that show. We're retooling the website. We're rebranding, as we said earlier. So that's on hiatus until August. But we got a bunch of other cool stuff over there. So still go.
Yeah, and all the travel that Scott's doing might have something to do with that. I don't know.
Yeah, doesn't help.
Yeah. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses like voting in our quarterly fan art contests, which is currently starting up again, monthly Q&A sessions, access to live streams of our recording sessions like this very one, and our excellent Discord chat. Special thanks, speaking of patrons, to new Planeteer Nathaniel at the $5 level and Captain's Planet SD, and Philip at the $10 level. Thank you so much, everyone. That really means a lot to us.
Yeah, absolutely. We really, really appreciate it, especially when we're in this weird transition time when we're doing all this rebranding and stuff. It means a lot that you guys continue to support us. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And as always, make sure you head over to Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/wildbow, and donate to him as well, because this is his world and we're just playing in it.
And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can instead help us out by heading on over to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a rating and a review. This week's review comes from Zion Did Nothing Wrong, who gives us 5 stars and says, simply put, Scott and Matt know what the hell they're talking about, or do a good job of sounding like it. That's probably that one. Their commentary and analysis goes above and beyond anything else I've seen about these books. Because of them, I've started thinking more critically while reading. Not only have they helped me understand Worm and Ward better, I feel like I have become a better understanding of why I like other books and media in my life. Both guys are articulate with their thoughts, and I almost always point out things I missed. It's ironic that I messed up the sentence where they said, we were articulate. Thanks to them, I have looked forward to Wednesdays for a long time. Oh, sorry. It's Friday. It's Friday this week. Sorry, Zion did nothing wrong. Also, we have a new review from Zidarian, who says, manages to capture the feeling of convincing a friend to read a book you love and then talking about it with them as they read. That's exactly what we were going for. So Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, these are both great reviews and make me feel like we've been a success at what we were aiming to do.
I know. It feels great.
Yeah. So that's it for the show this week. Next week, mailbag episode, and then we will be playing catch up to get back to
I just want you to know that if we had only had 2 chapters, we would have been perfectly on time. It's because we had a whole 3rd chapter that messed us up.
Yeah, well, it's fine. It was good.
It was.
Good.
It was very good.
Good shit. I'm going to hit stop now.
Me too.